Neo-Nazi and white nationalist protests turned deadly. There's bipartisan outrage. And this.
We condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence on many sides.
Plus fire, fury, and more.
He will truly regret it, and he will regret it fast.
An escalating war of words with North Korea. And a big GOP family feud. The president blames the top Senate Republican for his stalled agenda.
I'm very disappointed in Mitch.
Inside Politics. The biggest stories sourced by the best reporters now. Welcome to Inside Politics. I'm John King. To our viewers in the United States and around the world, thanks for sharing your Sunday. It is a sad morning after in Charlottesville, Virginia. A federal civil rights investigation is opening now, and an Ohio man faces a state murder charge after a march by white supremacists turns deadly. President Trump is under fire for his response to the violence, adding to the spotlight he faces this week. The president interrupting his vacation to pick a trade fight with China as he grows frustrated that Beijing won't or can't do more to rein in North Korea's missile and nuclear programs. It's a gamble after a week of escalating Trump rhetoric that at times caught even his own national security team off guard.
North Korea best not make any more threats to the United States. They will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen.
Plus, there's no summer break for Republican dysfunction. Still without even one big legislative win, the president sidesteps any blame and lashes out at the Senate Majority Leader.
I'm very disappointed in Mitch. But if he gets these bills passed, I'll be very happy with it, and I'll be the first to admit it. But honestly, repeal and replace of Obamacare should have taken place.
We begin, though, with that state of emergency and the political fallout after Saturday's deadly violence following a march by white nationalists and neo-Nazis.
I have a message to all the white supremacists and the Nazis who came into Charlottesville today. Our message is plain and simple. Go home. You are not wanted in this great Commonwealth. Shame on you. You pretend that you're patriots, but you are anything but a patriot.
With us to share their reporting and their insights, Margaret Talev of Bloomberg Politics, CNN's Manu Raju, Michael Scher of the New York Times, and Karen Demirjian of the Washington Post. What presidents say at big moments matters. Sometimes what they don't say matters just as much. Now, make no mistake, President Trump did condemn the deadly Charlottesville violence.
We condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence on many sides. On many sides. It's been going on for a long time in our country. Not Donald Trump, not Barack Obama. This has been going on for a long, long time.
But that many sides reference, put simply, failed the presidential test. And it is the source of remarkable condemnation this morning across the political spectrum. No, President Trump cannot be held responsible for the Trump campaign signs held by some of the white nationalist marchers, nor can he be held responsible for these words by one of America's best-known hate mongers.
This represents a turning point for the people of this country. We are determined to take our country back. We're going to fulfill the promises of Donald Trump. That's what we believed in. That's why we voted for Donald Trump, because he said he's going to take our country back.
But it should not be too much to expect the President of the United States to specifically condemn neo-Nazis and white nationalists, especially when they claim some affinity with him. By failing to do so, the President now as much of an issue as the marchers and their reprehensible views. Senator Cory Gardner of Colorado, one of many, many, many Republicans who say the president came up way short. Mr. President, we must call evil by its name, Gardner tweeted. These were white supremacists, and this was domestic terrorism. White supremacist neo-Nazis and anti-Semites are the antithesis of our American values, added Florida Republican Congresswoman Ileana Ros-Lehtinen. There are no other sides to hatred and bigotry. We begin the morning with a simple question: why? Why? This could be a very different morning. This is not hard. The president understands his history. The president had the access to the video. We assume the president has a competent staff. If he had added one sentence one sentence to what he said, and there were some very strong words in what the president said. Let's make no mistake about that. If he added one sentence saying, I do not stand with you, I do not stand for you, you do not represent me, go away, you have no place, something to that effect, anything to that effect, and we're having a different conversation this morning. But he didn't when he spoke, he didn't in his tweets, and he's had hours since, and he hasn't cleaned it up. Why?
He chose a different sentence to stick in there, actually, if we want to be perfectly honest about it. That on all sides was what he chose to add to what was otherwise a very strongly worded speech, not the sentence that you're suggesting, which would have been to name, and that many Republicans wanted to say too, which was to name white nationalism by name, Nazis by name. That's the very different choice to go with on all sides instead.
This was a slam dunk. I mean, this was very easy for him to do, to condemn white supremacists. That's something, of course, that virtually everybody who is in politics, they do. They condemn white supremacists. And that's what we saw last night from Republican after Republican. I thought Cory Gardner's statement was remarkable in the sense that he's a member of the Senate Republican leadership. He's someone who's been careful in his criticism of the president, unlike a lot of other Republicans. And he represents, of course, a purple state, a swing state, and something that could, a state that could easily flip, a seat that he could potentially lose when he runs again for re-election. But the larger question that I think a lot of Republicans have is, why does the president show no nuance in dealing with North Korea, dealing with Mitch McConnell, dealing with other people that he is concerned with? But when it comes to white supremacists or even Vladimir Putin, he does not go out and condemn them. That's a real question. I think a lot of Republicans and Democrats.
I think a lot of Americans. I think a lot of Americans are asking this. We could be having a very different conversation this morning about a president who 7 months in, a lot of people saying he's drifting, changed the conversation. If he just looked straight into the camera and said, I don't represent you, you don't represent me, go home.
Well, and look, part of being president is finding opportunities, right? If there's been a lot of criticism over the months and over the years that Donald Trump hasn't denounced sort of the white nationalist, he brings Bannon into the White House, but here's a moment, right? Like, here's the opportunity for him to fix some of that. You've got white nationalists and Nazis, not just sort of it's not a generic question. They're marching in an American city and then somebody dies. Like, that's the opportunity that if you want to, you can take and sort of put this to rest, and he didn't.
When as yesterday's events were unfolding, I interpreted the president's initial caution with his words, or sort of slowness to speak, as wanting to get it right, wanting to understand who was driving the car, what they were a part of, the big picture. But as the hours have gone on and the story has become clearer, I think the problem for the president is that the absence of a more decisive statement creates a vacuum where everyone is going to interpret what he's doing and what he's not doing. And so even now, if he didn't want to insert himself, even if he didn't want to make a pointed statement, the expectation now is very high. It's Sunday morning. He has an entire day to figure out how to handle this. But at this point, we have no word from the White House on updated plans.
Plenty of time to clean this up and to change this. He should have got it right the first time. Any president with a competent staff, and just the president by himself, should have understood the moment. But to your point, the Daily Stormer, which is the hateful propaganda of the marchers, the neo-Nazis and the white supremacists, they said this after the president. Trump's comments were good. He didn't attack us. He just said the nation should come together. Nothing specific against us. He said that we need to study why people are so angry and implied that there was hate on both sides. No condemnation at all. Now, again, that may not be fair to the president. However, he has to know that. He has to. If he had just simply looked them in the eye and said, "I don't speak for you, you don't speak for me. What you're doing is reprehensible," they can't do that.
Right. Also, words have meanings to different people. Unfortunately, we don't have absolute definitions of words. And to a white supremacist who's putting up a banner that says diversity equals white genocide, bigotry doesn't mean, oh, you're talking about white supremacists. It means maybe something else. It means maybe anti-white bigotry. I mean, in the worldview that these people have. And the president, this is not happening in a vacuum. At this point, the president or his advisors should understand this and should understand that he has been criticized when he is not absolutely explicit about what he means by calling out Nazis. Remember the David Duke dust-up, but whether he would denounce that. And even that, even the white nationalism reactions don't exist in a vacuum. I mean, there are people who have questions about where the moral barometer of this administration is because of things like not mentioning Jews on Holocaust Remembrance Day, or the Tillerson, saying that basically human rights can get in the way of U.S. interests sometimes.
And the Minnesota mosque bombing.
Minnesota mosque bombing. That's a more recent example, right? But this is
David.
Exactly. It's just it's thing after thing after thing after thing, and this is the most serious or egregious thing that we've seen because of what Michael was saying. It resulted in death. It is so blatant.
The death of a woman who was hit by that car, 2 Virginia State police officers dead in a helicopter that crashed that was overseeing down there for that reason. To that point, is it a breaking point is the question for me, in the sense that you see Republicans coming out. There are a lot of criticism from Democrats, and we'll get to that throughout the hour. But if you look, we mentioned Cory Gardner, we mentioned Ileana Russ-Layton, and more moderate Republicans, you might say. Ted Cruz, a very conservative former primary rival of the president. The Nazis, the KKK, and white supremacists are repulsive and evil, and all of us have a moral obligation to speak out against the lies, bigotry, anti-Semitism, and hatred that they propagate. I urge the Department of Justice to immediately investigate and prosecute this grotesque act of domestic terrorism. That from Senator Ted Cruz. Senator Orrin Hatch, we should call evil by its name. My brother didn't give his life fighting Hitler for Nazi ideas to go unchallenged here at home. Yeah. This is not, Mr. President, you're a little off here. This is, Mr. President, what planet are you on?
This is the Republican Party signaling very clearly, if you won't say it, we will, and by the way, you should say it. And, there are two things going on. One are the political ramifications of what's happening. The other is this is a moment of national tragedy. It's a moment of national discussion. It's August. It was a Saturday. I think a lot of people were doing other things when this happened, have come slow to the story. It's a terrible thing that's happened, and it's a moment of crisis that requires presidential.
And look, one of the things that happens, presidents and White Houses sometimes get things wrong. I remember when President Obama announced the beheading of the journalist in ISIS in 2014 when he was on Martha's Vineyard, and then went to play golf. Right. And it was sort of a moment that they sort of misjudged and misunderstood the sort of feeling in the country. But they came back and quickly canceled the rest of his golf for the rest of the trip and kind of changed it up. And it's 8 o'clock, 8:12 now. Uh-huh. I mean, the question is, does he go and play golf today in Bedminster before he fixes this? Does he come out and make a statement? Does he at least tweet? I mean, it's usually by now, it's, he would have been up and had fired off a couple of tweets.
And so we know we know who he is. We know he followed the coverage yesterday. We know he's up early on a Sunday morning reviewing the newspapers and the cable news program. And so the question I'll come back to as we close this block and we'll continue the conversation there is why? Why? Let's assume we're all human. Human beings make mistakes. If they were being cautious, if they didn't have a full information, if they wanted to wait yesterday, fine. But why? Why are we still sitting here with the president saying many sides, not white supremacy is evil, neo-Nazis have no place in America, I do not speak for you?
And John, remember, last week, Sebastian Gorka, one of the president's advisors in the White House, was suggested in a radio interview that white supremacy may not be as big of a problem as some people in the media believe. And that, of course, is crazy, considering that white supremacists have been responsible for a significant amount of deaths since 9/11, actually even more than Islamic terrorists here in this country. So there is a concern that there's some people in this White House may not be taking the threat of white supremacists seriously enough, and the president, by not denouncing that, feeds into that perception.
I would add ratings. Trump seems concerned about alienating any part of his base. And if these people are claiming to be a part of his base, that is potentially a problem. And look at his approval numbers. Although, if you're right, Manu, if Gorka is right about what he said, he shouldn't be that concerned. Because there were a few hundred people in the streets. This is not like a million people movement type of thing. It is small numbers, but with a very, very large.
There is no job in the world worth having if that's the only way to get it. We'll continue the conversation as we go through the hour. The president promises fire and fury if provoked by North Korea. And with his escalating rhetoric now comes an escalating trade stare down with China.